Hey guys, welcome to another AppSync video. Today we are going to demonstrate the offline capabilities of AppSync. Now if you guys can remember, we have been working with AppSync during the last 3 videos of this series. And I mentioned there are 2 ways of working with AppSync. Basically you can use the Amplify GraphQL client, which is a very lightweight client where you can easily interact with your AppSync backend, but it does not support advanced features like offline, etc. So if you need advanced features, we have another way, that is using AWS AppSync SDK. So today our main focus is using AWS AppSync SDK and build a small offline application. And I'm going to use Angular framework today because there are a lot of resources for React, but very few resources for Angular. And there are some gotchas we have to be aware of. So let's get started. So I will take a terminal and I am in my desktop, and let's create a directory offline. Cd into offline, and I will create new Angular application, ng new my app. Add routing guys, use SCCS and let it create. Okay, cd into my app and open it in Visual Studio Code or any editor you use. I will take an integrated terminal here, and now we have to install a couple of libraries. There are 4 libraries that you have to install. First one is the Amplify CLI. You have to install it globally. So write npm install -d at AWS Amplify CLI, and then you have to install AWS Amplify locally and Amplify Angular, and also AWS AppSync. This is our AppSync SDK and GraphQL tag library. So let me just copy the first one, install that. I've already done that. Let me show the version that I have. So I have 0.1.45, and let's install the other libraries. npm install AWS Amplify locally, Amplify Angular, and AppSync SDK and GraphQL tag. Alright, it's done. Now if I go to the package.json, have a look at the versions that I have installed. Now before building our application, we have to do a bit of initial configuration to avoid some compile time errors when compiling Angular with Amplify and AppSync. So first thing is you need to go to src and find your index.html at this script tag. So basically it's a reference to the window object, which is referred as global. So we need this one, okay? And don't worry guys, I will add a link to the GitHub repository so you guys can easily copy paste the code. Okay, first thing is done. And secondly, you need to go to tsconfig.app.json file, and under the compile options, under types, add node. So this is required when compiling application with Amplify. And now you need to go to polyfill.ts, so this file. On top of the file, we have to add 2 things. First one is a reference to the global object, that is referencing window, and another reference for the process. So these 2 are required. Alright. And also we have to do another configuration in tsconfig.json, this particular file. Here you need to set the attribute called skip libcheck to true, otherwise you will get some errors when you add the AppSync SDK. So make sure to add these 2. I think these are the main configuration we need. So now let's initialize an Amplify project. So I will take the integrated terminal and clear the console. I will type Amplify init, hit enter, editor, VS Code, JavaScript, Angular, src is our source directory, and build file will be in this/myapp, which is the name of our folder, and build command accept the default, hit enter, start ng server. Right now it's asking whether we want to use the AWS profile. In my case I will add yes, and I have multiple profiles. I will choose YouTube. You guys can choose default, or if you have a profile configured for AWS, use that one. So it's creating the stack. I will fast forward. Okay, done. Now we need to add some AppSync features. So let's clear this out, and I will add the auth first because we need a login. And let's use Cognito user pool authentication. for our small to-do application, and I will use the default configurations. Let's add API as well. Amplify add API. Choose GraphQL. Provide a API name. My app is fine. And here use Amazon Cognito user pool. Do you have annotated GraphQL schema? No. Yes, I need a guided creation. Single object with fields to do. Do you want to edit? Yes. And she'll open it up. And here guys, I will just take out the description as well. Just want the name of the to do. That's it. So I will save it and hit enter. Okay. Now we need to do amplify push to update the resources in the AWS. Select yes. So it will update both Auth and API. And now take this up a little bit so you guys can see. Do you want to generate code for your newly created GraphQL API? Say yes. Then choose the code generation language. Now here guys, you can use TypeScript because here it will create those mutations and subscriptions separately where you can easily import it. So use TypeScript. Accept the defaults. Say yes, I want to generate all. Okay, where should be the file? It should be in source api.ts. Hit enter. Now it's creating the resources. Let's give it a few minutes. Okay, it's created. Now if you go to Amplify folder and into the backend API my app and into the build folder, you can see the GraphQL schema that it's generated. So you have all the queries and mutations and subscriptions, all that, right? And also, if you go to your source folder, you should see a new folder created GraphQL. Inside that, you should see the mutations, queries, and subscriptions as well, right? Now we can easily import them into our components. So let's create our components. So how many components do I need? I need, let's say, 2 components. ng gc, first one, let's say auth, that will include our login screen. And I will create another one in gc to do, that will include our to do application. And also I will create a service file in AWS AppSync. So let's create a service called AppSync as well. So that is created. So let's see the generated files. Auth component, to do component, and here our AppSync service. Okay, first and foremost guys, we need to register Amplify Angular module and also our service, AppSync service. So let's import it in the app.module.ts file. So this is our main module file. Here let's import Amplify Angular module and Amplify service from AWS Amplify Angular library. So the module, put it inside the imports, and Amplify service, put it inside the provider. Now we need to import the AppSync service as well. So this new service that we just created. So let's import that AppSync service from AppSync service. It should be simple as here. And add this to our providers list as well. Now when we push our AppSync services, it has created this AWS export.ts file, or rather JS file. You can find it in your source folder here, AWS export.js. So it has all the reference to your backend resources like where your user pool ID, and AppSync GraphQL endpoint, etc. So we need to reference this in our application and initialize at start. So go to main.ts file here and let's import this AWS export file. I import it as Amplify, import Amplify from ./AWS export, and also import the Amplify library itself. Import Amplify from AWS Amplify. Now let's configure Amplify. Amplify.configure, configure with our exported configuration. Okay. Now it will initialize successfully. But we have to do one other thing. As you can see, our AWS export is a .js file. We have to convert it to TS. We can do it using a script provided in the documentation of Amplify. For that, you go to package.json and you have to replace the start and build command with a script. So if you go to Amplify documentation at this link and you go to Angular and Ionic menu. And if you scroll down a little bit, you should see the script here. Just copy these two lines. So that is basically converting your JS file to TS on the fly. Just replace start and build. Nice. Okay, now let's add our login screen. Let me go to auth component.html. So this will have our login screen. Clear out the content. Let's use the built-in directive for Amplify Authenticator. So this will easily render our login screen. So import this directive amplify-authenticator into your auth.component.html. Now for styling this component, you should add the styles as well. Just search your styles.scss file, which is here inside the source directory here, and import Amplify Angular theme. You can find this also in the documentation. So let's see if the things are working fine. So I will type ng serve, so that will start the application locally. Let's see if there are any compilation errors. It seems to be working fine. We forgot to add one thing, that is our routes. So go to your app folder, and in there app-routing.module.ts. So currently we don't have any routes, so let's add some route. I'm going to add two routes here. First one is to do. So if someone navigate to /to do, it should load up the to do component. So let's import the to do component up here. To do component from to do component. And also the default route is our auth component that will render our login screen. So I'm not going to add any route guards or anything as such, right? You guys can use it if you want. Auth component from auth/auth component. Okay, and let's navigate to http localhost 4200, and I should see my login screen. I see, let's remove this default content. I will go to app component.html and let's remove all this default content. Save that, come back here. It will reload the page, and here's our login screen. So make sure you don't have any errors in the network tab in the inspect element. Now let's add a very basic UI to our to-do component as well. So inside our to-do component, to-do HTML, I'm going to replace it with this bit of HTML. So this is basically rendering an input type or an input box, and then a button to click. So in the input box, you will type the to-do name, and when you click the button, it will fire this create to-do event, and it will pass the to-do name along with that. And under it, we are going to render all the to-dos in an array called all to-dos. So basically, when you click the create to do, we will add that to do into this all to do's array, and that will show it in the screen. So in the JavaScript side, guys, let's import our service first. So I'm importing AppSync service from our AppSync service file, and let's inject this into our constructor. Let's create a private variable called AppSync of type AppSync service. So now we can use this AppSync service, which itself is singleton throughout our components, to talk with our backend services through the AppSync SDK, right? But before that, let's add some configuration or the code to our AppSync service. So I will go to source app and AppSync service here. Currently we don't have anything. First I'm going to import AppSync SDK from AWS AppSync, and then we need AWS export file as well, because we are going to use the GraphQL endpoints from this file when configuring our AppSync SDK. Finally, we have to import auth and auth type from AWS Amplify and AppSync auth link, because these are necessary for sending out the credentials of the user when requesting the information. So let's see how to use this. I'm going to paste some code into the constructor. Okay, let's go through that. First, I create a variable called client. So this is basically AWS AppSync client that we have exported up here. So as for the configuration, we have to pass few attributes. First one is the AppSync GraphQL endpoint URL that we get from AWS export file, because inside AWS export file we have this particular endpoint. Let me quickly show you here. So that's the URL and the region. So again, in the same export file, you can get the region as well. Now we have the auth attributes. So auth type is basically, it's a type of Amazon Cognito user pool, because we have initializer user pool. You can here use the API key, if you want, but use Cognito user pool because that is the standard when it comes to enterprise applications. So you go to pass the ID token along with your request. So that's where we are extracting the ID token from current user session. So we are getting the ID token and send it in attribute called JWT token. So that's our client basically, and we need to export this client. We'll have a variable up here. Let's say HC, and at the bottom of constructor, let's assign underscore HC variable to our client, and let's have another function called HC. So what does this HC mean anyways, guys? So HC is basically hydrated client. Don't need the arrow function here. So here we are returning this dot underscore HC hydrated. Okay, a quick word about AWS AppSync client. So this is basically using Apollo client. So Apollo client is a GraphQL implementation that has offline features as well. So AWS AppSync has created a wrapper or another implementation from Apollo client, and that's what we are using today. So in Apollo client, we can cache all the queries in the local storage or any other storage medium, and here it will wait until the cache is populated. So then only it will return the client or the AppSync client. So let's see how to use this AppSync service. I will go to to-do component. We already imported the AppSync service here. And in our HTML, we have a create to-do function that will fire when the button is clicked. So let's have that function implemented. So I will create an async function for that. So it will pass the to-do name here as the parameter, and let's check if to-do name has some value, and if so, let's create AppSync client. So I created a constant called client, and I'm awaiting this .appsync.hc. So this .appsync is our service here, and hc is the function that returns the hydrated client, right? So we are waiting for the client, and afterwards we have to create our mutation. So what is the mutation? It's basically creating this to do in the database, right? So let's look at our mutations. So if you can remember, inside our GraphQL folder, we have mutations. So here's our create to do mutation. So we need to export or rather import this mutation into our to do component. So let's do that. I will import create to do mutation from GraphQL mutations. And also I'm going to import GraphQL tag library as well. Import GQL from GraphQL tag, and let's import other tools as well, like the queries and the subscription, because we have mutations, so we may need the queries and subscriptions, or at least queries. So I'm importing the list to do's queries from this queries.ts file here inside the GraphQL, and I have create to do mutation as well. So how do we make this mutation, guys? So basically, now that we have the AppSync client, we can simply use client.mutate, right? And add the mutation together with the passing to do value. So that is fine, but are we using the offline features yet? No, right? So in order to use offline functionality, we have to make sure that if there's no network, cache whatever the mutation in the local storage or whatever the storage medium that we are using for our front-end application. And thanks to Apollo client, it will maintain a map or a queue of all the mutation that is being added during the offline. So it will maintain this queue. So this queue will have all the mutations. Let's say you added three to-dos. So it will first add the to-do one into this queue, offline queue. And when you add the second to-do, it will push this to the queue, that one as well. So similarly, it will like populate this queue in your local storage at the front end, right? So whenever the network is back, so when you're online, so it will start executing this queue item from the order that they were received. So it will start from the first element or the first item, and it will go to the last element that was added. So now to call this functionality, there are two ways. First one is either you can use an update function that will be called when offline as well as when it is back online. Or you can use the build mutation helper from AppSync SDK, which is the recommended method. So let's use build mutation. For that, I need to import build mutation up here first. Import build mutation from AWS AppSync. And here, let's get the result of the mutation into a variable called result, SULT. Okay, Okay, and I'm going to copy paste some code here. Okay, now let's go through this code. So I created this constant call result, and I am awaiting the client again on a method called mutate. So this is basically the function that call the mutation from the AppSync SDK. So client.mutate. And so inside the parentheses, we have to pass our build mutation function. So the build mutation function, as we have imported up here, so we say it's build mutation, and inside that build mutation, it accepts several parameters. Here's the first parameter. So it is the first parameter is the client, our Apollo client, right? Or AppSync client rather. And then we have to pass the mutation. So which mutation are we going to call? It's the create to do mutation, right? So create to do mutation we have imported up here, and I'm going to wrap that mutation using GraphQL tag library. So GQL. So this will add proper GraphQL tags to our create to do mutation. And then the third one, we have to pass the input type. So we have not yet imported our create to do input. So let's do that at once. So we need to import the inputs as well. So currently we don't have any inputs associated here. So I will create a new file called inputs.ts, and here I'm exporting the create to do inputs. Let me paste that. So from where did I get this? So I'll show you. So it's basically this text that I copied from our GraphQL schema. So if you can remember, our GraphQL schema is available inside our Amplify folder, in the current backlog, API, in the build, GraphQL, and here you have create to do input. Just copy this and come back here and paste it in here. So simply add two backticks and export it. Now we can import it from here. So in our to do component.ts file, so I'm going to import that, create to do imports from GraphQL inputs. Nice. So now our error is gone. So we are decorating that again with GraphQL tags and variables. So variables is basically the inputs that we are providing it, right? So as you have already seen, it is expecting a name, the to-do name, and that is a mandatory field, right? So in our AppSync backend, we are generating this ID automatically. So we just have to pass the name here. So as our variable, we are passing to do name dot value. Oh, we have to pass this as an object. So let me just take it out. I will add object literals here. Name has to be to do name dot value. Nice. So then we are passing another query, list to do's query, as we have imported it up here. So we have imported list to do's queries as well. So why do we actually need these guys? So in build mutation, so what basically happens is if it is offline, if there's no network, what Apollo client does is it will use one of the queries that has cached earlier in the local storage. So here it used the list to do's query. So it will read all the to do's or the list of to do's that it has cached earlier. So it reads it from the cache and add this newly created value into the cache or the list to do's array. So it will read the cache and write the new item into the cache as well. So finally, we have to pass the to do type. So that is also required. So when the network is back, it will play all the mutation that is recorded inside the cache. And there's another concept called optimistic UI update. So that is basically when there's no network, obviously result is not going into the database, right? And it is stayed in the cache. But we will update the UI even though it is not persisted in the database, so that it will give a better user experience for whoever the user using the application. So how to do that optimistic UI update? So once we have built the mutation and it returns the results here, let's push into the array that we are referencing in the UI. So that is all to do's, and I'm going to push the result that is returned here. So that is all to do's, and I think we have not references up here as well. So let's add that variable up here, all to do's of any type, and down here let's push that item in the cache into this dot all to do's dot push, and it is inside the result variable result dot data dot create to do. And let's empty our to do name value as well, so it will look nice on the UI. All right. Now, when loading up this component, I need to like show all the to-dos that has been earlier added, right? So let's populate these all to-dos with a query by calling the list to-dos query using our AppSync client. So in ng on init, I'm going to paste this code. So I pasted this code. So it's basically this .appsync hide client. So we are calling our service, and then you get a client, and inside that client we are calling the watch query. So that will basically do a query on list to do's, which we have imported up here. And the fetch policy is cache and network. It's basically check cache and then go into the network, and we are subscribing to the data that is returned from the query, and we are setting this all to do's to the data that is returned from here. It is data dot list to do's dot items. Right now, as I previously mentioned, this code will be available in the GitHub link below. Okay, now it all looks good. So let's see if it is actually working. So I will go to my UI and do a refresh and make sure you don't get any errors. And now let's create an account. Click create account, give a username, password. You have to add capital and numbers there. Sign up. Okay, you should receive an email to your email address. Get that code and paste it here and confirm it. So then you'll redirect to the login page again. So type your password, sign in. Okay, now you are signed in. So now let's navigate to do. Okay, I don't see any errors. That looks good. And let's try to add a to do, shall we? Go to gym. Yes, it added. Beautiful. Let's verify that. I will go to aws.amazon.com and into my DynamoDB. Log into your console, guys. Okay. And this is my table here. Click on that. And in the items, there you have it. So it persisted. Beautiful. So let's add another one. Eat healthy. Yep, that is also added. Let's check that. There you go. Now let's try our offline. So I'm going to click here and turn off my Wi-Fi. So it's turned off, and I will add offline to do. Let's see if I see a network request. It is directly added thanks to our optimistic UI response. But as you have seen, there is no any network call. So let's reconnect our Wi-Fi and have a look at here. You should see the request will automatically be made. There you go. This is the request that got automatically made. And now if you go to DynamoDB and refresh it, there I have the offline to do. Beautiful. If I refresh it again, you see those are indeed persisted. So this is what I want to show you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if you guys like my videos, so if you want to see this nature of content, please like and subscribe to my channel, guys. Thank you very much.